Have you ever felt a quiet pressure tightening around your decisions, as if saying no would somehow make you a bad person? That invisible tension is often not coincidence, but the subtle beginning of emotional blackmail, a psychological pattern where guilt, fear, and obligation are quietly turned into tools of control. It does not arrive loudly or aggressively. Instead, it slips into your life through familiar voices, trusted relationships, and moments when your guard is down. You begin to notice that your choices are no longer fully your own, because each decision carries an emotional cost carefully placed on your shoulders. The manipulator rarely demands directly. Instead, they imply withdraw or exaggerate their suffering to make you feel responsible for their emotional state. This creates a powerful internal conflict, because as a human being you are wired to care, to empathize, and to avoid hurting others. Emotional blackmail exploits this natural empathy, turning your kindness into a vulnerability that can be shaped and controlled. Over time, the pattern becomes harder to detect, because it blends with normal emotional exchange, making you question your own perception. You may start asking yourself whether you are overreacting, whether you are selfish, or whether you are responsible for someone else's happiness. This doubt is not accidental. It is part of the mechanism that keeps you compliant. The more uncertain you feel, the easier it becomes for someone else to guide your actions without open force. At its core, emotional blackmail is about power, but it disguises itself as care, concern, or even love. That is what makes it so dangerous, because it blurs the line between genuine connection and manipulation. You are not simply responding to a request. You are reacting to an emotional consequence that has been strategically framed to influence you. The moment you begin to feel that saying no will lead to punishment, rejection, or emotional withdrawal, the dynamic has already shifted. You are no longer acting from freedom, but from pressure disguised as responsibility. And this is where the real danger begins. Because once your boundaries are slowly eroded, it becomes increasingly difficult to recognize where your true desires end and the expectations of others begin, leaving you trapped in a cycle where compliance feels safer than honesty, and silence feels easier than resistance, slowly disconnecting you from your own voice, your own strength, and your ability to stand firm in the face of emotional pressure. Until one day you realize that the greatest battle you are fighting is not with another person, but within yourself, where fear, guilt, and obligation quietly compete against your need for freedom, clarity, and self-respect, shaping the direction of your life in ways you never consciously chose, yet continue to follow without fully understanding why it feels so difficult to simply say no and walk away when something inside you already knows that your peace should never require your surrender to someone else's control. Even when it is hidden behind the illusion, at some point, the pattern begins to reveal itself, not through obvious confrontation, but through a growing sense of unease that lingers long after every interaction, as if something unseen is quietly shaping your emotions from the shadows. Emotional blackmail follows a predictable cycle, even though it feels different each time, and once you start recognizing it, the illusion begins to crack. It often starts with a demand that seems reasonable on the surface, something small, something you could easily agree to. But beneath it lies an unspoken expectation that your compliance is not optional. When hesitation appears, the tone shifts, and this is where the real mechanism activates. The manipulator introduces pressure, not through logic, but through emotion, using guilt to remind you of everything they have done for you, fear to suggest what might happen if you refuse, and obligation to make you feel that you owe them your agreement. These three forces intertwine in a way that creates a psychological trap, one where saying no feels heavier than saying yes, even when yes goes against your own needs. As this cycle repeats, a deeper layer begins to form, one that is far more dangerous than the surface manipulation. You begin to internalize their expectations, anticipating their reactions before they even express them, adjusting your behavior to avoid conflict, disappointment, or emotional withdrawal. This is the moment when control no longer needs to be applied externally, because it has already been established internally. The manipulator no longer needs to push, because you have learned to pull yourself into alignment with their desires. What makes this even more unsettling is that it rarely feels like manipulation in the moment, because it is wrapped in emotional language that mimics care and connection. Statements are framed in ways that make you question your loyalty, your compassion, or your character, making resistance feel like betrayal rather than self-protection. Over time, the emotional cost of standing your ground begins to feel overwhelming. And this is exactly where the balance shifts completely in their favor. You are no longer evaluating what is right for you, but what will keep the peace. What will prevent discomfort? What will avoid the emotional consequences that have been conditioned into your responses? And just when you think you understand the pattern, it deepens, becoming more subtle, more refined, more difficult to confront directly, because it adapts to your awareness, finding new ways to maintain control without appearing forceful, leaving you caught in a silent struggle where the lines between manipulation and responsibility blur even further. And the question that begins to echo in your mind is no longer whether you are being controlled, but whether you have already surrendered more of your autonomy than you ever intended, without even realizing when it first began to slip away. The moment you begin to see the pattern clearly is the moment your power quietly starts to return, because awareness breaks the illusion that once held you in place, and what once felt like an unavoidable emotional burden begins to reveal itself as a constructed pressure that you are not obligated to carry. Emotional blackmail loses its strength when you stop accepting responsibility for emotions that were never yours to manage. And this shift requires a deeper understanding of your own boundaries, not as walls to shut people out, but as lines that protect your sense of self from being gradually reshaped by external demands. Resistance does not come from confrontation alone. It begins internally, with the decision to no longer let guilt dictate your choices. To recognize that feeling uncomfortable does not mean you are doing something wrong, and to accept that someone else's disappointment is not a reflection of your failure. This is where many people struggle, because breaking free from emotional manipulation often feels like becoming someone colder, someone less caring, but in reality it is the opposite, because you are learning to care in a way that is honest rather than coerced. The process is not immediate, and it does not happen without resistance from those who have benefited from your compliance. Because once the pattern is disrupted, the manipulator may intensify their efforts, increasing emotional pressure in an attempt to restore the dynamic that once worked so effectively. This is the moment of greatest suspense, where everything feels uncertain, where you question whether standing firm is worth the discomfort that follows, and where the temptation to return to old habits becomes strongest. But this is also the turning point, because every time you hold your boundary, even in the face of discomfort, you reinforce a new pattern, one where your decisions are guided by clarity rather than fear. Over time, the emotional noise begins to fade, and what once felt overwhelming becomes manageable, because you are no longer reacting automatically to pressure, but responding consciously to situations with a sense of control that was previously missing. You begin to notice that true relationships adapt to your boundaries rather than punish them, and those that rely on manipulation lose their influence when they can no longer access your sense of guilt as a tool. In this transformation, you rediscover something essential: the ability to trust your own judgment without constant second-guessing, the confidence to say no without needing to justify your worth, and the understanding that your peace is not something to be negotiated under emotional pressure. This clarity does not make you distant. It makes you grounded, because you are no longer navigating relationships from a place of fear, but from a place of self-respect that allows genuine connection to exist without control or hidden agendas. And as this awareness strengthens, you realize that the most powerful protection you can build is not against others, but within yourself, where your values, your boundaries, and your sense of identity stand firm, unshaken by manipulation, allowing you to move forward with a quiet strength that cannot be easily influenced. because it is rooted in the simple but powerful truth that your choices belong to you. And no amount of guilt, fear, or obligation has the right to take that away from you ever again. And in embracing that truth, you step into a version of yourself that no longer seeks approval at the cost of authenticity, but instead chooses alignment with your own principles, knowing that this is where real freedom begins and where lasting peace is finally found. Because you have learned not just to recognize emotional blackmail, but to rise above it with clarity and strength.